Well, good evening, everyone. And I'd like to talk about something a little different today. I want to talk about how you go about using the digital radios. And I'm going to talk about these three radios, the Grundig Yacht Boy 300PE, Tecsun PL330, and the Sangean ATS 909X2. What I want to suggest is that each of these radios is actually designed to be used in a different way. All of them will allow you to type in a station, so we won't talk about that, and that works fine on all of them. But this radio, I would argue, is designed to be used in a different way than this radio and this radio. So what I'll do is I'll start with this one, then we'll talk about this one, and then we'll talk about this one. And what I want to suggest is that when you're buying a radio, you want to buy one that's going to work with the way you want to use it. And you don't want to be fighting the radio to, to pull in the shortwave stations you want. You want it to be a fairly natural thing. And if you're going to do that, you've got to work with what the designers intended when they built the radio. And these are my preferred ways of using these three radios. And I'm approaching it looking at just one thing. What do you want to do when you want to find new stations? If you've got stuff programmed into memories, they all work great. The memories on this are complex, but once it's set up, it works well. This has a slightly different approach. This has fewer, but that's sometimes better, right? That's another issue. Right? I'm not talking about looking up things that are in memories. I'm thinking you're going to turn on the radio, you're going to do something and find a station that you've not listened to before or weren't planning on listening to that night. How do you do it? So let's start, as I said, with the Grundig. I'll pull in an antenna. It's been a pretty good night here, but it's starting to get on the later side for some stuff. This is the correct time, right about midnight here in Toronto. I'll turn it on. Okay, so you can switch to various meter bands. Oh, sorry, it's the alarm switch. Right, so it flips through. But it also depends on whether you're in shortwave 1 or shortwave 2. All right, so let's go, for where we're likely to find something, which is the 49 meter band. So one way you can obviously do it, you can go step through like this. And as I said, you can type in stations. But what do you do if you want to find, okay, the next channel here? And I do apologize, this thing has very sort of high-pitched sound. Not quite sure what's wrong with it. So there's Radio Cuba. Strong carrier, no signal as usual. And there's Radio Marti. Strong as anything. But you see what I did? I just reached over here and scanned to the next station. And that's the primary mode of operation of this radio and many less expensive radios. You can put things in the memories, but that's what you do. You go from one station to another. This is not very practical. I mean, unless you want to just go through a very small part of a band where you might find a signal. Then I suppose it works. Right. You'll notice there's no muting on this radio, which we'll get to when we talk about the Tecsun. That's because this is a strict PLL receiver. Okay, so that's how you use the Grundig. Absolutely straightforward. Once you figure out you can hold down the button, you've figured it out. The only complication is having to be in the, having to be in the proper shortwave band before you do it. That's it. Easy peasy. Downside is it doesn't actually search very fast. So if you're in a crowded band like the 49 meter band, then you'll find lots of stuff. The other thing is, of course, you're dependent on its algorithm finding the stations that you want to find, and there's not any way of changing that except by changing the distance and local switch on the side of the radio. Okay, so let's talk about the Sangean. Now, the Sangean can be used exactly the same way. Right? You can use it exactly the same way. So you can go 49 meter band, and you can, it'll pull in a lot more. It's a lot more sensitive from the Grundig. But so that works fine. And you know, you've got a few complications. You've got a bandwidth switch. It's got an automatic bandwidth mode, which is useful for some things, but I don't use it all that much. Right, and you can. Right, so you know there are a variety of different things you can do with this radio, but you can use it in that mode. But you also have, because you have this dial here, it turns very quickly. And so there's Radio Marti again. Right, so it turns very quickly from station to station. You can change its steps if you want to go, you know, in 1 kilohertz steps, which isn't that useful in the broadcast bands. Right, you can do that. It also has search functions that will search areas of shortwave bandwidth, for example, and put those into specific memory pages. As I said, the memory system on this it's very large, but it's split into pages and it's fairly complex. That's useful if you're trying to build up presets that you want to use, but I find it yet less useful, you know, what's on tonight. The way the system works, it's not as useful for that purpose in my view. So I tend to use this radio by going to a band and, you know, tuning around in it by hand in just the way I would with an analog radio. Oh, I just managed to knock the auto bandwidth switch. And in fact, the radio is set up for you to do that. That's, you know, this quick access to all the bands here with, you know, direct access with the broadcast bands labeled. That's, you know, it's clearly designed for that. And that's what I bought it for. I wanted a radio that I could tune smoothly and quickly and without, as we'll see, muting, which the Tecsun has. But, you know, although the search functions are capable on this, I don't find them particularly useful at all, and I rarely use them. I use them to set up my FM and AM presets, and that's about it. I've very rarely used its search functions in shortwave. And that brings us to the Tecsun, and the Tecsun is all about the search functions. As I'll show you, you can, okay, direct entry, right? You can direct enter a frequency. You can find a band. Oh, sorry, but you got to put it in. The Tecsun is very mode oriented. You can find yourself in a band and you can tune around in there. But notice what it's doing. I'll turn it up so you can hear. It mutes between steps as you turn, right? So although this is doing an excellent job at actually getting the stations, right, it's finding everything that the Sangean caught. I mean, I think the Sangean is very slightly more sensitive, but not really, so you'd notice. This is an excellent radio, but that's just not very fun. And it's even less fun if you bring the step down. So now it's muting even more often, right? So that's fine if you want to go through a small area But it's just like, it's not going to be any fun to, you know, take the 49 meter band and, you know, chit, 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 chit up through it. It's not fun. So I don't use it that way. And if you don't use it that way, it's fine. You've got, this is where I say you've got to use a radio the way it's designed to use. What the Tecsun has is its ETM, and in this particular model, ETM Plus. So we're now in ETM mode. And what it will do in ETM mode is it will scan the entire shortwave band, or, you know, the medium wave band if that's what you're using. But it'll scan the entire shortwave band. It's fairly sensitive. Its sensitivity can be affected a bit by changing the AM bandwidth, but so if you make the AM bandwidth narrower, it will find more stations. If you make it wider, it will find fewer. But in general, you want it to find everything that looks like it might have a carrier on it, so you might narrow it down. That's improved a bit on the version on this radio. Even if the bandwidth is open, it's still pretty sensitive, I find. So let's do that. And we'll hold down the ETM button, and it will now start scanning through the stations. We can just do this in real time. And so one of the benefits of this is that it will catch things that you're not looking for, because it's searching all the bands up to the top of the broadcast band. So I think it tops out at 21 megahertz or something like that is where it stops. And the speed has been improved on the PL330 compared to my old PL380. So, you know, this is not really a terribly aggravating thing. And then what you do is, rather than step through frequencies with this, you will step through the presets that it's essentially established through its search. And you can see 31, 32. Now, a lot of those will not be things that you want to listen to, but some of them will. So let's let it do its thing, and you'll see it takes a jump, right? It's really just searching broadcast bands, although broadcast bands are fairly broadly defined on the PL330. I think this is one of the ways that they've improved the scan time dramatically on the 330 compared to the older 380. This takes, I don't know, well, you'll see in the video, because it takes maybe a minute, something like that, a minute and a half. As you see, we're already up to 15K, well, 15 megahertz actually. And yeah, so it scans through the broadcast bands. Now, this scanning system isn't useful for finding, say, hams. This radio has single sideband, as the Sangean does. Then you'll need to step through. But on the other hand, then you're stepping through fairly narrow areas of bandwidth, actually, to look for, you know, to see whether there's anyone you can listen to, right? If you're, you know, I'm just looking at my chart. If you're looking at the 40 meter band, you're only really going to be going from 7 megahertz to 7.5 or something like that. Okay, so here we go. E23, that means it was done for the 23rd hour, which it is. So let's see what we got. Now I can zoom down a little bit. So that's not anything there. There's a Canadian time signal. Preachers. US time signal. This is the same things that I won't go through what, some of them I know what they are, some I don't. There's Radio Cuba. Did I mention how sensitive this radio is? It's really excellent. That's Radio Marti. Oh, this is one of my favorites. This is from Japan, but rebroadcast, is Radio Nippon rebroadcast from France. It comes in very strongly here in Toronto. So as you see, a lot of these, some of these signals are weak, more time signals. Well, the 15 megahertz time signal. And you see some digital mode stuff, right? If it's got a carrier. And that's it. So the point is, I'll zoom back so we can look at all three radios now. The point is that that's how you use this radio, right? There's no point in messing around with the muting tuner and the irritations that are involved in that. That's no fun. Scan, have a look. Then if you think it missed something, go and hunt for those by typing them in or, you know, tuning down a little bit using the dial. That's fine, right? If you want to tune around, you need this radio. And if you want to, you know, jump from station to station, right, using an automated search, well then the Grundig will do it for you, or the Sangean. This won't. So hopefully that's a briefer version. I've done a couple of versions of this video and been dissatisfied them in one way or another, so it gets cut down more and more every time. But what I'm arguing is that, you know, when you buy a radio, decide what you want it to do. How are you going to interact with it? What does it matter to you? This radio is for sitting on a desk. It's for being connected to an antenna, at least in my use, and it has all the controls you use on the front. Nice big dial, good for tuning, doesn't mute, you know, doesn't go between stations, right? That's what I wanted, so that's what I bought. On the other hand, this one's portable. This one has the, you know, Tecsun's latest search function, which is really pretty incredible. This is a great radio to take traveling, to take camping. It sounds pretty good for its size. And if you like to use a search function to find stations, then you probably want to look through Tecsun. Maybe not this model, maybe something else in their line. If the search functions are the things that are important to you, then probably that's what you want, or a bigger one, and not this model. If your requirements are simpler, there are all sorts of radios that have this kind of approach. Although, I've got to say, I think for value, it's really hard to beat this particular radio. So, pay attention. There are lots of videos of lots of people using radios for extended periods on YouTube. Have a look. I mean, if you're going to spend, you know, in Canada, this will, by the time you get it imported, this will probably cost you, you know, a little under $100. Depends on how lucky you are with Canada Customs when it comes in. The Sangean, you got to watch, don't overpay for this, but it's going to be $300 and up, depending. Before you spend that kind of money for radio, make sure you know that you'll interact with it the way you want to interact with it, right? You wouldn't, you know, buy a computer and then find out that it only runs DOS. Well, maybe some of us would be amused by that, but most people probably wouldn't. We'd expect it to run Windows or Mac OS or a reasonably recent Linux UI, right? Where, you know, we care about what the interfaces are on our devices, and we should about these too. And you just decide which one you like, and go for it. You know, the better radios are all pretty good right now. I mean, we'll leave the Grundig aside because that's a late 80s, early 90s design, but these, if it's there, they'll pull it in. And Tecsun gets a little bit of a nod on single sideband use, and it's got a sync function, which some people like I haven't found terribly useful. Sangean, well, it's just very nice to use, I find. Anyway, well, hopefully that's helpful for you. You know, as I said, don't buy a radio you're going to fight with. It's going to be no fun. Figure out how you're going to use it. Buy something that works the way you want it to work, and you'll be much happier. All right, thank you.